Please we welcome to the stage the author of Warhorse, Morpurgo. Star of Warhorse, Jeremy Irvine, and Alan. Emily Watson plays Rosie Narrow. We've got Tom Hiddleston who plays Captain Nichols. Please welcome co-screenwriter Richard Curtis. So Jeremy, can I start with you?
Yeah.
How mad is it being at the centre of a Steven Spielberg?
I don't know, I kind of woke up this morning and really had to kind of work out whether last night was all a dream. I mean, you know, I really did come from having no lines in the theatre show to straight to this, so yeah, it's completely mad. I'm still trying to take it all in, and you know, just having lines is a privilege. To do the movie is even more like being a Spielberg movie is, I think, kind of just more than I can relate to. So, yeah.
Okay, well, let's ask the total questions from the floor. We've got questions anyway. Yeah, let me know.
Hi, I'm Lily from Film Club, and I have a question for all of you. What do you think are the elements of Warhorse that make it such an influential film? And what was it about the film industry that really influenced you personally in your career choices?
Richard.
Well, all I'll say on the first one, I will say that it was very interesting. Last night, my 10-year-old came with me to the film, and he gave a book to the Prince, which seemed to me, which he described as the most important day of his whole childhood. And when we got into the cab afterwards, he said, "I've learnt one thing from tonight." And I said, "What?" Assuming it would be, you know, Prince William is very tall or something. And he said, "I learnt never, 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 never to go to war." And that was his single takeaway from it. So I think, you know, the fact that this story about a boy and a horse and lots of, you know, small clutches of people can yield the message that war is a ghastly and wasteful thing is one of the reasons that the movie is important, and the book's always been wonderful on the stage play too. So I don't have to answer the bit about that film career.
Do I have to do that?
You have to do that one.
Gosh. Briefly to answer the first one, I think that I've taken away with me is I hope an undying love for horses. I didn't really ride before. I'd ridden a little bit before I made this film, but the sensitivity and nobility of those animals is something I never expected. The depth of their capacity to feel, and I think what Michael must have always known, and then what Richard and Stephen have taken on is that horses have so much to teach us. And in this film, the horse's capacity for courage reminds people of their humanity. And I find that moving every time I watch the film. And in terms of the film industry, what's had an impact on my life personally? I suppose that I've just always been a cinephile. I was a cinephile as a child, and I'm a cinephile now. And your tastes change as you grow older. But I grew up on Steven Spielberg films. I must have, before the age of 10, I must have seen Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark about 50 times, and always wanted to be on a horse wearing a hat with John Williams writing the theme tune. And lo and behold, on a horse in a hat with John Williams writing the theme tune. So I do feel as though I'm lucky enough to live out some kind of dream.
And Emily, what influenced you?
In the film industry, well, I'd say industry is not the right word for what I do. And I'd say I've never really had a plan. It's all been a bit of an accident. And I think the things that have influenced me most are the people that I've met some really amazing human beings. Steven Spielberg, people like Robert Altman, Lars von Trier, just some people who kind of changed the map a bit of how we think about culture, how we think about art, and that's been a privilege.
And Michael, about the story? What do you think inspired the story?
Why can't I talk about my
Yeah.
career in film?
Please do.
I'm age 68. I have just started my first movie. Happens to be the Stevie Spielberg movie. No, I'm beginning a new career. He's already taken me on for his next. Indiana Jones is what I'll do next. It's a lovely insight for me into a world I don't know, which I find fascinating, but it's a foreign land. Like most writers, you sit in a room and you scribble a story, and you don't have a connection with the people who then take your story, whether it be to the stage or to the screen. And with this particular story, I got enormously lucky. And as Emily said, one of the lovely things about it is that you meet extraordinary people with wonderful creative energy. You do take your story onto a different level. And that's just to be involved in a small way, to look at a script occasionally, make a comment or two, and then to put on moustaches and get up dressed and be silly on the set for a day. It's fine. It isn't just all silliness, it's because I want to be part of it. I don't want to be separate from something that is important to me as a story I wrote 30 odd years ago. And to go back to the point of it all, as Richard said, this is the story, it's called Wars, but the Germans are interested in this, that they're the only people who changed the title. They call it Commerce, and I think that's significant. This is not really a story about war, it's a story about friendship and a reconciliation. And someone said they came out of the theatre, and I'm sure they'll do this when they come out of the film show as well. It is finding an anthem to peace, this story. They've made it that, both the theatre people and the film people. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, it's a question for the cast members here present. The old chestnut has it that every actor has on his CV can ride a horse. Now Tom sort of touched on this, but how good were you with horses before that, and have you ever fibbed to get a job?
Well, I didn't fib to get this one, I promise you that. I'd actually done some riding on another film called Thor, but little do people know that Asgardians ride like cowboys. And we rode on Western saddles, which are much more comfortable. They have pommels, and the saddles are like big armchairs, and you just sit back and pretend to be John Wayne. And when I was taken off to cavalry school with Benedict Cumberbatch and Patrick Kennedy, we were disabused very quickly of our bad habits and drilled for 5 weeks like soldiers. It's an amazing thing to learn to ride, because it isn't like acting at all. In that horses are so sensitive that they'll call your bluff. So if you're feigning confidence with arrogance, you're off. They'll bolt. You'll fall. You won't be able to control them, and you have to sort of be humble enough to allow them to teach you how to ride, which is a big lesson for me.
Emily, effect to get a job?
I don't think so. But I didn't let on the long scale horses for this one.
I remember doing all my first auditions and trying to convince them that I am this master horseman, and doing a scene with a horse, and the casting director Jean Jay is filming me, and it's a very emotional sort of speech, I guess, to this horse. And just when I went to get the tears up, this horse stamps on my foot, and for anyone who's been on horses, they're quite heavy. And I was trying to desperately convince them that I didn't have a horse down in my foot, and the tears were real that time, I think. But
Jeremy, you're an amazing horseman, though. We used to turn up to this farm in Rickmansworth, all of us, and David Cross as well, and Leonard Caro, Celine Buckins, anyone who has to ride in the film. We were all taught to ride in the same place. And I would turn up at 8 in the morning for a cavalry session, and Jeremy had already, mucked out 3 horses, and he'd been there since 6 o'clock, and he was a sort of he was part of the furniture like a stable boy, and I think definitively the John Wayne among us.
But I think coming back to that, it's what I learned very quickly with horses. Not having been an animal person before, and having never been on a horse or never been around horses, is you learn very quickly you can't fake that. You know, those relationships that hopefully you see on screen have to be real. You know, there's no way around that. The 14 horses that play Joey, I had to have those real relationships, or you're going to get on camera and those horses aren't going to be interested. You know, you've got to be able to do a scene where you're talking to the horse and to make it so it's interesting, concentrating on you. You know, that does take time, and you can't fake it. I think.
Yeah, question.
Just a question to Jeremy. Were you ever panicked by the size of the film when you were on it?
Yeah. You know, I was terrified, and rightly so. I kind of had to stop myself thinking about that. You know, I really had to force myself not to think about this being, you know, on set with Steven Spielberg and having such a wonderful cast around me who would kind of sit me down and tell me it was okay, and Steven Spielberg as well, you know, being so kind and paternal with me. And you know, I remember Tom saying to me one day that, you know, when I was probably feeling very freaked out, he's saying, you know, it's just a job, and it's like any other job. And, you know, you turn up to work every day and you do the best job that you can while you're there, and then you go home, and that's when you can freak out.
Did I say that?
Yeah, I remember the stables. Yeah.
Question there.
It's a question from Michael and Richard, if they could tell us a bit, please, of the research that they did into the horrors of the war to end all wars.
Michael.
Well, I had the best opportunity a writer can ever have. Unless you can be in a place yourself and go through the subject of your story yourself, the next best thing is not to read a book about it or see a movie about it, it's to talk to the people who've been there. And 30, whatever it was, years ago, when I wrote the book, I just moved into the little village of Hiddleston where the story is set, which has become our home, and got to know 3 old men who lived in the village, 80 at that time, all now passed on, 2 of whom had been to the First World War, and 1 of whom had been there when there was a horse sale outside the pub, which is the view, and was there when the boys came home as well. And the 2 soldiers who went, one being an infantryman, and gassed, and gone through all sorts of horrors that we all know about, that we read about in Wilfred Owen's poems, that we know about from Over the Lovely War, and all quiet on the Western Front. But here I was talking to someone who'd been there himself, and actually hadn't talked to anyone else about it before. I have no idea why he had his heart and his memories to me, but he did. And then living down the lane from us was the 3rd octogenarian who had been an officer of the yeomanry and had gone to war with horses. And he it was who told me about the relationships his men had built up with their horses, and how he'd go to the horse lines at night, talk to his horse about the matador, which was his fear, and planning to get home. And again, it seemed that what was extraordinary about these moments is that I didn't realise it at the time, but maybe they thought that this was, in a way, them handing on their story. So I was lucky to be a witness to their stories, and moved and upset and angry. And the research then led me to the Imperial War Museum to find out the numbers and the figures, which are important, but not nearly as moving as the stories of the individual people and their horses. Roughly speaking, most of the 1 million horses went there, the First World War, and 65,000 came home, which means that roughly the same number of horses died as men on our side, and that's just on our side. And then the entire war, maybe 10 million soldiers, 10 million horses. And then the thinking comes in on top of the research, and you think, well, they died the same way. They died on the wire, they drowned in the mud, with exhaustion, with disease, burned apart, just the same way. And many of them were sold off for butcher's meat, because the government didn't think that they were worth bringing home afterwards. So there were a whole lot of the personal memories which came from these men, and then the research on top of it, which angrily enough is a down and write a story.
Well, Richard, what did you...
Well, no, I very much depended on all Michael's work and on his book. I bizarrely wrote a situation comedy about the First World War when I was younger. We did. It's Ben did all the work then on the history, because he was a great expert on that. So it was very much not my job to look at the history of it. I was trying to, you know, enrich the characters that Michael had written.
Yeah, no.
This question for Michael. Did it ever take any sort of reservations sort of allowing Warhol to be taken to the big screen? And did it need to take people of the calibre of Richard Curtis and Steven Spielberg to persuade you?
I want to come back on something Richard just said, because he normally keeps himself very brief and never says anything. But in fact, that scene, I don't think he was referring to from Blackadder, is one of the great scenes of cinema about the First World War. Utterly extraordinary. I don't know how long it was, less than a minute, which I think gave the entire nation an intake of breath about the reality of what happened, because we knew all these extraordinary characters that he and Ben had created. And the laughter stopped, and that was what was extraordinary about that moment. Nearly saying, because you weren't saying nothing, just talking. Anyway, what was the question? Sorry. Reservations. I didn't know for a start. I didn't know Richard was going to be involved when we. All I knew was that there was a man called Spielberg, I never heard of him, who wanted to make a movie, and I thought it was a pretty good idea, because we had already thought. I had thought 15 years before of making a movie of this, and I'd written the script myself. And had a wonderful producer, a man called Simon Channing Williams, who was the producer on The Constant Gardener, and Mike Mead's great producer, who sadly died a couple of years ago. He and I worked 6 or 7 years on a script to try and make this thing come to the screen. I think probably the scripts weren't good enough, and he maybe didn't have the contacts enough. I don't know, but it didn't work. And it faded away, and the book just went on selling very, very little. And then the play happened, and then from the play came this connection with Kathleen Kennedy, who saw the play, spoke to Spielberg, who indeed she worked a lot over the years, and then I found out from my agent that they weren't just going to buy the rights, but that he actually wanted to make it himself, direct it, and would I come and meet up with him at a place called Claridge's. Well, I thought, well, I'd like to go to Claridge's. So we went and had lunch at Claridge's. They eat very minimally, Americans, I find, but here we are. And we had the most extraordinary conversation in which I suddenly realized this man really cared about it. And that's what came across. This was a storyteller, storymaker, who really cares about the stories that he takes on. And he was passionate about it, completely passionate. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be wonderful to have someone like that holding your baby, growing your baby, so to speak, and see what happens. And since this is the man who made E.T. on Schindler's List, I thought, well, maybe we could cope with wars.
Question there, and a question there.
Richard, following now on coping with wars, I read your foreword in the reprint in which you said when you told people you were writing wars, they said, how would you deal with the puppetry of the horses of the film? But were you surprised how much real horses were capable of doing on screen? And in writing those scenes, did you take that into account? Was there something you could do?
Yes, no, it's absolutely right. When I said I was going to do the film, a lot of people said to me, how are you going to do the horses? And the answer was with horses, rather than with bits of wood. Yeah, I mean, the strangest bit about the film for me was that I did do horse days. That was the peculiar thing. I remember ringing Stephen and saying, I won't be writing any lines this week, I'm just going to do horse stuff. And I did, because always when I write a film, I spend at least a day or two only writing each character on their own, going through the whole film, just checking that I haven't left holes in the arc of every character. You have to do that with every character in the whole movie, and particularly if the characters are the lead characters. So my girlfriend says she saw me pawing at the desk and going a lot. And I mean, I was sneezing when the horse got ill, and I got mocked a lot because she said horses don't sneeze. But I did try and think, you know, here's a horse and he's been in the comfort of that farm, and then suddenly, where there've only been 2 people, there are 1,000 people in uniform, and then suddenly he sees dead horses for the first time in his life by the side. So I did try and imagine at each point what the horse would be thinking. So in a way, and set up expectations that the horses would be very emotional in the film, and I think those were all, you know, fulfilled.
This is a question for Jeremy. To have a starring role in a Spielberg film is incredible, and to have it so early in your career is exceptional. Where do you go from there? What's next for you?
Well, you know, one of the loveliest things to have come from this has been that I can now get work, which is nice, and work where I have lines. I've just finished, just a couple of weeks ago, I finished playing Pip in Great Expectations, the movie that's coming out later this year. Film on cast from Ray Fiennes, and another movie coming out in May called Now It's Good with Kate Fanning. And my next project is called The Railway Man with Colin Firth and Rachel Weisz. So it's been shooting in Australia in a couple of months. So yeah, you know, it's more weirdness. Yeah.
Finally, can you talk about how Spielberg works as a director? What sort of tricks does he use to get performances out of him?
He does a really strange thing, which Dave Hewlis was, you did ask me.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, Dave Hewlis was saying last night that Luc Besson does the same thing, that he's like a horse whisperer, he talks to you during the take. And the first few days with his mum and David, when we were doing that stuff in Devon and Farm, we were all a bit taken aback by it. I mean, we all come from a, Mike Lee, Ken Loach, kind of, it's all very truthful and realistic, and your performance is sacred and you don't, and then, in the middle of doing your scene, he's talking to you. And actually, after, I found that, after an hour or so, I started to really enjoy it. Because the film is constructed in such a beautiful, lush, old-fashioned Hollywood kind of way. Every shot is beautifully designed and it lands, so he knows exactly what he wants. So he's planting little seeds in your head and letting little things sprout as he goes along, so that you're kind of flowering under his watering can of ideas as the camera's rolling. And I guess it takes a director of incredible skill and consummate ease of, he doesn't have to reach for things, he can just make things happen. It was really a pleasure.
And Tom, you sort of starting to get a major steal with action sequences. How do you kind of direct his actors in situations like that?
Yeah, he was magisterial at that, I have to say. That's what I found so extraordinary about him is the speed of his creative execution and his decision making is what impressed me so much. And we've come to associate him with such greatness. And I'd forgotten to have an expectation of what he might be like at his job. And he's able to make such quick decisions, and he keeps his crew very nimble and fleet of foot. They're all kind of dialed into his speed, as it were, and his thought process. That if he suddenly sees a piece of magic happening between horses or between some actors, or the light has changed, the crew can move very quickly to adapt to that. And with the cavalry charge sequence, the way he directed me and Benedict and Patrick in terms of the emotional guidance we got was particularly extraordinary. And he depended very heavily on their stunt team, who were the horse masters and the experts, because we needed to make sure everybody was safe, all the actors, all the stunt riders, all the horses. And we'd practiced for weeks those charging sequences. But there was a moment when Captain Nichols sees the machine guns, and Richard, you'd written it in the screenplay, and also Michael depicts the moment so beautifully in the novel that Joey suddenly feels a lightness on his back, that he doesn't realise that there's nobody riding him anymore. So Stephen wanted to show that basically Captain Nichols' death without you seeing him die. You don't see him get shot. And but he said to me, he said, Tom, this is the only piece of slow motion in the film, because actually I don't think slow motion is very effective as a dramatic tool. Sometimes it is, but you have to use it sparingly. And it's going to be completely silent. And when I want to see you see the guns, and then I'm going to cut back to the machine gun, and then I'm going to cut back to Joey, and you're not going to be there. And the camera's going to move across your face, but I don't want you to do shock or surprise or fear or terror. How old are you? And I said, I'm 29. He said, okay. So at the top of the shot, give me your war face, the face you've been doing all day. You're winning, you're triumphant, you're a noble officer, and it's all going well. And now I'm going to say guns. And when you hear me say guns, the camera will settle, and I want you to de-age yourself by 20 years. So you're 29, and then you're 9. Strip away the man and show me the boy. Kind of leave that with you. And I thought that was one of the most heartbreaking pieces of direction I'd ever received, and it just was so emotionally acute. In the middle of this action sequence, you know, this great, grand, epic, exciting, dramatic piece of cinematography with 120 horses going at 40 miles an hour, he had the space in his filmmaking head and in his heart for something very intimate, and I thought it was amazingly impressive.
Gentleman front row. That's a question for Richard and Michael. Steven Spielberg was saying earlier that the story needs to be accessible to the whole family. How do you find the balance between doing justice to the horrors of the Somme and the First World War and making it accessible so that children or younger audiences can watch or read the story, follow the story?
Can I just say, by the way, I've seen Now Is Good, which is Jeremy's next film, and it's a really beautiful, really extraordinary film. Just make sure, because it's a smaller film than this, and it's not directed by Stephen, but do make sure you see it when it comes out. I think it's wonderful. Well, the strange thing was, from my point of view, very quickly, and I think in some ways this relates to the way Michael writes his books, because Michael's books are full of shocking sadness for children. There's a book called Private Peaceful, which is I found hard to read, and yet is my sort of teenage son's favourite book. And in the whole process of working with Stephen, he never mentioned this was a family film to me. He never said that. He never said, we're going to have to make a concession here, we're going to have to bend it here. Do remember this is a PG-13. That never came up really. He sort of made those discretionary judgments in the way he shot, in the lack of blood, things like that. But from the creative point of view, he, asked me to tell the truth about the situations that were occurring. And then he judged the pitch at which he would shoot them, but he didn't restrain it at all by saying we've got to be careful, let's hide this or anything like that in any way.
In that sense, I think he kept wonderfully close to the spirit of the book. Because the book leaves you, I hope, desperately sad, wretched, wrecked really, because we lived through the horrors of the First World War. But there are no body parts. We know they exist, of course we do. And we didn't need to see Saving Private Ryan to know that. We know in wars these things are terrible and dreadful. But I think we also know that they're no sadder because of the amount of blood that you see. And what he does wonderfully well, particularly the same scene that John was talking about, when you come away from the charge and you're looking down on the battlefield and you're seeing the horses and the men lying there. So that's a feeling, it's all you need. And it conveys to an adult audience, to a child audience, all that needs to be said of the waste and the pity of it. All for the said so wonderfully.
I think that's time for a couple more, so
I'm just wondering for all of you to a point how much making the movie, writing the book and the screenplay, how much that has given you an appreciation of what soldiers and personnel go through in conflict, and I guess for Emily's character, those who are left behind as well.
Jeremy.
I'd be very careful here to say that I don't think any of us are going to say that we can relate to what these young boys and men went through. I think it'd be insulting to say that we could. I can't really speak to scenes that I was in because I think I can't be objective about that. But I remember standing up on the day when they're filming the cavalry charge, and being moved to tears watching Benedict when he's captured in that scene. I think, you know, having spent time with Tom Benny, these, just great friends and guys, and to imagine, these people who, would have been just like us really, and dying in their millions. And I think what the film does is sums up the futility of it, and I think that's what I find so impressive.
Tom?
Again, I'd have to second what Jeremy said. Having never served as a soldier, I really don't know. But certainly I felt an enormous responsibility to represent the kind of spirit with which that war was fought, and the extraordinary courage that people displayed, and the whole section of the film I'm in, I think, is about the triumph, in part about the triumph of individual and collective courage over fear. And there's lots of moments where there's a moment before the cavalry charge when I hope people can see how wretched and terrified Captain Nichols is beforehand, and he's trying to take confidence from his horse. And I suppose the experience of being in that charge, where we had the privilege of all of the resources available to Steven Spielberg and his production designer Rick Carter, we were really 120 horses in that phalanx, galloping towards an immaculately recreated German camp. So that really the only things that weren't recreated were the bullets in the guns. And doing that charge was thrilling and terrifying, because you hear 480 hooves thundering in your ears, the sound of 120 stuntmen screaming at the top of their lungs, the looks of 300 extras running away from you in terror. I mean, it felt as real as it could possibly get without it actually being real. And it made me kind of recalibrate my appreciation for what real conflict must be like, and what real soldiers must go through. Yeah, so certainly reshifted something in my mind.
I mean, the other thing I would say, which really moves me in the film, is I think it's also a film about decency all around, and of course, thinking about, as it were, the enemy, because one of the profound points of Michael's book is that people behave as well on the German side, and I love and the central scene in a way is the scene in No Man's Land, where two completely new characters encounter the horse, both get on so well with each other, both have such common decency, and it's that reminder that under all the bravura and noise of war are decent people on both sides who wish for peace, and I think that's very important in the film.
Emily, how do you feel about the return of people on the home front?
I have a very personal connection with that. My grandmother, when she was 12, her elder brother lied about his age. He was 17, and joined up and went off to war, and was injured and died later in a German prisoner of war camp, and sent a letter home saying, "'Tis but a scratch, I'm fine, don't worry about me. Please pay my backman, I owe him £1," which was the last act of an honourable dying 17-year-old. And when I was in my mid-20s and she was in her 80s, she talked about it for the very first time and showed me this letter, and which she had kept with his photograph and his medal by her bed for her entire life, and she sobbed her heart out as if it had been yesterday. And that single experience that evening, sitting in her cottage in Dorset by the fire and hearing the story, gave me the minutest glimpse into what must have been the most profound nationwide grief and loss, because that story was replicated in every family across the land. And it's, Harry Patch was the last surviving British fighter from the First World War. He died last year, and it is now leaving living memory. And I think this film is very timely, because it shines a light again on that terrible conflict that was so meaningless in a way that the Second World War wasn't as meaningless. I think it's very profound, but to me that sense of the people left behind, I really, there's a moment of when you see Rosie knowing that her son's going to leave for war, and I just felt that very strongly.
It's difficult, really, because any story you write about war, or any film you make about war, is bound to be political. Whether you like it or not, people are going to look at it and say, well, this is a pro-peace film or a pro-war film. For me, I'm a war baby. I grew up in London just after the Second World War. My first memories of this city were ruins and of wrecked lives. The family that was split up by it, like the divorce rate multiplied by 4 in this country from 1945 to 47. The direct result of, I know it sounds silly, but it's a direct result of the fracture that war did to this country. But more to the point, the reason I think that people are interested in the book of War Horse now, which they want for approximately 25 years, is the saddest reason possible. And that is that we have bodies coming up, and coffins covered in flags, not just in this country, but worldwide. And I think people are more in contact now with the consequences of war than they've been for a very long time. And that's what amazes me sometimes, when politicians seem to forget their history. That they don't look and read and learn about what has happened before. And maybe they haven't got the memory, maybe they're already too young to do that. But you can see how we become puffed up, and how the cockerel in nations rises so quickly if we're not careful. And any story, it seems to me, that gets us thinking, particularly gets young people thinking why, to come out of that cinema, out of reading a book, out of that theatre. I think we should just simply be asking the question, why? Why did that happen to those people? It wasn't necessary. And anything that gets us thinking like that is really important. And Richard said right at the beginning this about his son coming out of the cinema and just having thought really hard about what this war thing is. Well, that's important. And so I think a film that does that as powerfully as Steven Spielberg has done is terrific. So I'm very pleased that I'm associated with it.
That's a nice place to end. Ladies and gentlemen, please show us